We uncovered evidence against people from Asian backgrounds, white backgrounds and black backgrounds. Predominantly in Wolverhampton, the pimps that we charged with offences were predominantly black Afro-Caribbean. But I have also travelled during the course of my investigations, and I've presented seminars in Yorkshire, for example, where I know that's not the case and where I know that Asians are the main culprits.
I think the police are overcautious in dealing with this issue openly because they fear being branded racist, and I think that's wrong.
But there could be a problem, couldn't there, for the police if they were to say this is principally done by Asian gangs? This could stir up racial tensions.
These are criminals. They should be treated as criminals. They're not Asian criminals, they're not Muslim criminals, they're not white criminals. They are criminals, and they should be treated as criminals.
If offences are disclosed, they have to be investigated. There's no way you can just conveniently ignore them because of a certain sensitivity of whatever kind it is. They have to be thoroughly investigated.
You don't think the police are too cautious in approaching this because of the possibility of stirring up racial tension?
Certainly not within my experience, and I say the experience that I have is to the contrary. Where evidence has been displayed in that way, it has been followed through. But I can't say that that's the certainty in all cases, because I have to talk within my experience.
After its pilot projects, the government changed the law and issued guidance to police forces. Grooming is now a specific offence, and children are now seen as victims. But there have been only a dozen convictions for pimping them. A decade ago in Wolverhampton, police learned how to protect victims and gain convictions. Lessons they fear have been lost. Pimps boast that they can do as they like, and all too often they're right.
There are very few people in our prisons up and down the country with convictions for these sorts of offences.
Does that mean that if a gang decides that it wants to pimp young girls, they're pretty much likely to get away with it?
Well, that's a bold assertion, but the evidence would support that assertion.
So the answer is yes?
Absolutely.
The government points to a rising annual number of successful prosecutions for child grooming and prostitution offences.
It's 44 people convicted under the offences under the 2003 Act. If we look back to the 8 years under the old Act, if we look back to the 8 years, the decade before 2003, there were actually just 6 convictions for these sorts of offences. So,
but isn't Professor Barrett right when he says to us, if somebody wants to pimp young children in this country, they're likely to get away with it?
No, he's not right. And
well, where are the convictions?
Well, as I say, we've got 44 convictions.
44 out of a huge number, like 5,000 children.
Well, it's 44, which is an increase on what we saw before. But is that good enough? No, it's not. We want to do more.
Many cases don't make it to court because the children involved are too scared to talk. One officer told us they're usually much more frightened of their pimps than they are of the law.
Some of them are quite terrified, and with right reason. We had a case in the West Midlands where a girl had her tongue nailed to the table when she threatened to tell. I worked with a girl who had her hair yanked back, her head pulled back, mouth open, with a kettle of boiling water held above her throat. You don't tell or run away if you've got a kettle of boiling water held above your throat. And then there's all sorts of networks of these boyfriends, so that even in cases where I know that men have been remanded into custody, girls have been threatened over the phone.
One day I was picked up by an older man who was a lot older than me and took me to a park. I didn't know this man, and then I was told. He pulled a gun out from under the seat and put it to my head and told me that I was going to die in 3 seconds, and then counted down from 3 to 1 and pulled the trigger. But it wasn't loaded, and he found that amusing.
The family reported Jane's case to the police, but she then withdrew her allegations, she says, because officers couldn't guarantee her safety. The force concerned say they investigated the case but couldn't find enough evidence for a prosecution. Jane is now considering an action claiming police negligence. Experts have told Panorama that they're reminded of the position with domestic violence 20 years ago. Everything hangs on the key witness, and she won't talk, either because she's petrified or she blames herself. There's a new approach to family violence these days. Abused partners get protection and the support they need, but that's often missing for exploited children. It's as if we still expect them to simply leave their pimps.
I think in the past we used to say that with domestic abuse. Why on earth does she stay with him? I think it's understanding the emotional traumas that these young people have gone through. I mean, we know on average it can take 7 years for an adult woman to leave a violent partner, and that's a mature adult woman. We're talking here about children, 13, 14, 15-year-old children who haven't got that understanding or maturity.
The officer who ran Wolverhampton's successful operation a decade ago argues that police need committed teams to achieve similar results.
My view is that the only way it will be uncovered and the only way to stop what is a really, really serious crime is to have dedicated units, as we do now with domestic violence and things like that, which historically is a subject that was never recognised, is to have dedicated units to deal with it.
With child prostitution?
With child prostitution, because my experience is that it's occurring in all major cities across the United Kingdom.
We've been able to find only 2 police forces which have dedicated units working with other agencies. In Blackburn, the new police unit fighting child prostitution works with social services, education and health teams. But does it have enough officers for the task it faces?
I suppose people would argue there are never enough police officers or social workers.
There's you full-time and 1 part-time colleague from the police?
Yes, part-time sergeant working on it.
Does that seem to be enough to you?
No. When we do have a complex case that comes in, it's many, many hours of investigation.
Doesn't it represent a shocking failure by the government that a decade after the pilot projects that the Home Office set up showed that this was an enormous problem and that it could be tackled, you're still sitting here saying to me, we should be doing better?
No, I'm saying we have in many respects done better, particularly in terms of the support that we've given to victims. If we talk to the police, if we talk to the prosecutors, we know that it's a difficult area to prosecute. Part of the problem is how we give the confidence to the victims in order to give evidence, how we give the confidence to people around them.
They found all this in Wolverhampton and Nottingham a decade ago. They found out how to do it. And the problem is you haven't made police forces up and down the country do it.
Well, we've issued the guidance to police forces. We know now. Well, we've issued guidance, and the guidance is going to be updated. The police are looking at how they ensure that that is enforced. And of course, alongside that, each police force now has child abuse investigation units. So those units are operating and functioning.
The next day, the Home Office emailed Panorama to confirm that pimping children will be covered in new police targets. And the government has said it'll produce a warning video for use in all schools. Meanwhile, one of the oldest crimes in history continues to threaten British children at the threshold of adult life.
I was just an innocent little girl who went from playing with the dolls to being this adult who was having sex with loads of different men.
On Monday, 6 weeks after police search teams started digging beneath a children's home on Jersey, Panorama's cameras go inside to the heart of the investigation. That's Jersey, Island of Secrets, back in our usual slot on Monday at 8:30.
Back to tonight, Martin Kemp and referee Graham Pole are among the guests. Next for This Week.